Hello everyone, it's the Pace Chaser again. Welcome to another model review video where we look at some of the older diecast that you can get second hand. And today we've got the EFE exclusive first editions, GM Standard, Atlantean and Fleetline. GM of course standing for Greater Manchester. The model I've got is catalogue number 29010, in delivery of Badgerline. It's not actually a Badgerline bus as such. EFE did model it operating for somebody else, but I'll explain that in due course. So what I'll do is I'll have a quick look at the history of the Greater Manchester Standard. We'll talk about the EFE model. We'll have a look at the history of the vehicle modelled BNE 737N, and then we'll do the all-important look around. This one is a Daimler Fleetline, but don't worry if you prefer Leyland Atlantean, we're going to cover those as well, as I'll explain later on. So the Greater Manchester Standard was developed by Selneck PTE, Passenger Transport Executive, in the early 1970s as their standard vehicle. In 1974, Selneck PTE had its operating area expanded to include, among other places, Wigan, and it was renamed Greater Manchester PTE. They continued to take the GM standards. As with many such vehicles, they weren't actually standard, there were several variations of them. They were built on Leyland Atlantean and Daimler Fleetline chassis. The Fleetline was later rebadged as a Leyland product, and so they continued to be built on Leyland Fleetlines as well. The bodywork order was split between northern counties of Wigan and Park Royal of London. There were detailed differences between them. The EFE model is a northern counties bus, and I'll explain that when we do the look around. In the early days, some of them had two doors. Most of the production had one, as modelled by EFE. The first couple of years they were produced, from around 1972, they had flat glass windscreens arranged in a kind of V shape. But from mid to late 1974 onwards, they went on for this one that EFE have modelled, the windscreen that curves round at the corners, you can just about see there. In the late 70s, a couple of batches appeared with slightly inset lower deck side windows, and that was because they started to use more aluminium in the construction of the vehicle. And then after a couple of years of that, the windows went back to being flush, but the front upper deck window there acquired an actual proper pillar dividing it rather than just a little dividing strip. It had a body pillar, and the windows became sort of round cornered. EFE did model that variation as appropriate as well. And at the same time that happened, the hopper vents went from this arrangement where around 3/4 of the window actually opens to being full width. Again, EFE did model that variation as appropriate on some of their releases. I should just mention as well, for completeness, that the body was adapted to fit on various of the second generation chassis. So you could find them built on Leyland Olympians, Volvo Ilsas, MCW Metro buses, Scania N112 and Scania N113s, Dennis Dominators, and there are also 3 Dennis Falcon Vs. But of course we're concerned with the Leyland Atlantean and the Daimler and Leyland Fleetline as modelled by EFE. Some other operators did take this body style, although obviously the vast majority were supplied to Selneck and Greater Manchester PTEs. Various other operators bought them new. Filed Borough spring to mind, and indeed EFE have modelled a couple of filed vehicles. Cleveland Transit also had a few buses rebodied in the early 80s with this style of body as well. Deregulation in 1986, Greater Manchester PTE's bus operating division was renamed GM Buses. Around that time there were massive service cuts. The new rules said that all services had to make a profit basically. So there were large scale service cuts across Greater Manchester, and also the number of spare vehicles was reduced to a more reasonable proportion of the fleet. As a result of that, several hundred vehicles were withdrawn and put into storage, and they started to sell them. Initially the PTE and GM buses wouldn't allow them to go for further service. They were worried that people would buy them and use them to compete against GM buses themselves. So they gave instructions they had to be sold for scrap. And to try and enforce that, they sabotaged them. They took engines and gearboxes out, they removed axles, they cut through axles. In some cases they even cut through chassis members to make sure that the buses couldn't be used. After a short while they realised that other operators were making a lot of money out of selling their surplus vehicles for further service, because you get more money for a runner than you do for scrap value. So they relented and allowed them to go for further service. Initially they were sold via the Kirby Central dealership in South Anston near Rotherham, but after that they did start to do direct sales, and then when they sold the surplus, Obviously, as these vehicles were withdrawn as they reached the end of operating life, GM Buses and its successors sold them to other people as well. As a result of that, these vehicles turned up all over the place, from Kent up to Scotland, from the East Riding of Yorkshire down to the Swansea area. At least one made it to the Isle of Man, and I think some of them were exported to Ireland as well. Keneally's of Waterford spring to mind as somebody who operated these vehicles. So they appeared absolutely everywhere, giving quite a scope for EFE to do various different liveries. So the EFE model first appeared in September 2002, and it was produced until May 2016. I'm assuming that the moulds still survive. EFE went bankrupt but were taken over by Bachmann and now trade as EFE Rail, who have introduced one or two of the original castings. This isn't among them, but presumably they could do it if they wanted to. But in the 14-year period that it was produced, there were 21 Leyland Atlanteans and 15 Leyland or Daimler Fleetlines, so 36 releases altogether. As I said, the one we're looking at is catalogue number 29010, and this was released in November of 2008. So the vehicle model, BNE 737N, was new to Greater Manchester Passenger Transport Executive in August 1974 as fleet number 7421. It was originally supposed to be registered YNA 387M, but it arrived late enough to receive an N suffix registration, and it appears to have spent most of its life in Greater Manchester working from Tameside Garage in Ashton-under-Lyne. It was loaned to South Yorkshire PTE in the early 80s for a period of time when they were short of buses, but it returned to Tameside and went back into deregulation. So went back into service, should I say. At deregulation in 1986, it was withdrawn along with a lot of other vehicles, as I've already said, and it was put into storage. It was sold in 1987, I think via the dealer Kirby Central, as I said, to Badgerline, who put it into the Badger Vectis fleet, and it's with Badger Vectis that EFE have modelled it, and it became their fleet number 72. Now, Badger Vectis was a joint venture between Badgerline, who were the former country area of Bristol Omnibus Company, so they ran the interurban and out-of-town services from Bristol, and they also ran local and interurban services around Bath, Weston-super-Mare and Wells and places like that. In 1987 they went into partnership with Southern Vectis, the operator on the Isle of Wight, to form Badger Vectis, with the idea of running services in Poole in Dorset in competition with Wilson Dorset. It caused shockwaves at the time because up till then most of the competition that had taken place was just smaller operators trying to cream off a bit of the profits on busy routes in towns and cities. This was about the first time that large established operators had turned on another large established operator. And they didn't just go into Poole with a couple of services, they went in with a network running all around Poole and across to neighbouring Bournemouth. So it's with Badger Vectis this bus is modelled. Badger Vectis was owned 80% by Badgerline, 20% by Southern Vectis, so the buses carried Badgerline livery and fleet names. There was a variation in the livery, which you can see the front panel on the normal Badgerline livery was yellow, but the Badger Vectis buses had it painted green, and the reason for that was the other big operator around Bournemouth who ran to Poole was Yellow Buses of Bournemouth, obviously whose buses were yellow, the clue's in the name. So to enable passengers to differentiate the Badger Vectis vehicles, Badgerline painted the fronts of the Badger Vectis buses in green, the lower fronts, as you can see there. Badger Vectis ran from September 1987 through to March 1988. It was a tale of two halves. For the first 3 months they did really well. It looked like Wilson Dorset might collapse, but then Wilson Dorset fought back and rallied, and Badger Vectis ceased operation at the end of March 1988. The buses were split up. They went either to Badgerline or to Southern Vectis, or some of them were sold directly. BNE 737N went up to Badgerline at Bath. I'm not quite sure if they used it or not. The only pictures I've seen of it in Bath are of it standing in the depot yard with its blinds blank. So I don't think they made much use of it, if any. It appears to have been sold to Smiths of Ulster in the West Midlands, who traded as Yorbus and were famous for running on the service between Birmingham and Maypole in competition with West Midlands PTE, or West Midlands Travel, should I say, at the time. But again, I don't think Smiths actually put it into service. The only pictures I've seen of it with them, it was standing in the depot, still in full Badgerline livery. From Smiths it was sold to Fairway of Liverpool, one of the many independent operators who set up against Mersey Bus, and it appears that Fairway, where it's last operated, it was still in use in about 1992 there, but I've not seen any evidence that it passed to anybody else, so I think they withdrew and sent it for scrap. So that's the history. We'll have a look now around the actual model. So as I mentioned earlier, the EFE vehicle is a Northern Counties bodied vehicle. The front dome of the Northern Counties was squarer than the Park Royal version, and the square shape is modelled really well there. The large ventilator that was a feature of Northern Counties bodies at the time is printed on. I'm guessing that's just because it was easier than casting it. You couldn't make a Park Royal vehicle out of this. The Park Royals had two horizontal louvers put side by side, but you couldn't really pass this off as a Park Royal. The front window is a little bit disappointing. As you can see, it's kind of in a V shape, which it wasn't on the Northern Counties. The Park Royals had a V-shaped window like that, flat glass arranged in a V. But the Northern Counties ones, it was as flat as a pancake. It looked like somebody had just stretched cling film across between the pillars. They were really, really flat, so it doesn't look right for Northern Counties, and it does spoil the look of it to some extent. It's not a major deficiency, but it just doesn't look quite right. The between next panel is quite nicely done. There's a bit of the panel lining there cast in. The destination blind is printed on, that's so they can do different variations of it. As I say, some people like Fileborough bought these bodies new, and they are just normal rectangular blinds. But a lot of the people who bought them after deregulation rebuilt the destination blind area to their specification. So it just enables EFE to do different variations. And again, the little vent there is printed on. Not all vehicles had that on. The windscreen is really good. As I say, this windscreen was introduced in the middle of 1974. Like the entire vehicle, its design was simple but distinctive. The whole look of the vehicle, it's not particularly groundbreaking, but it looks distinctive and it still looks clean and modern. And the windscreen was the same. There's nothing particularly remarkable about it. It's not a funny angle or a weird shape or anything. It's just like a normal windscreen, but you see it and you automatically think GM standard. It just stands out. The dividing bar and the wipers are moulded on and picked out in black as well, as you can see. The lower panel is nice. You've got the indicators cast in there, the panel lining there. The headlights and fog lights are on a little raised podium, which is modelled, and the registration plate was on a raised box, as you can see there. All nicely modelled, and the mirrors look pretty good. This one was bought unboxed, so it's been packaged up for postage, and that one's been crushed in a little bit. I don't really move it out because it might snap off. But yeah, they look good. They're not too overscale, and they look quite nice. So we go around to the near side. General impression of size and shape is very good. The cove panelling is a nice shape. The windows are the correct size, and you know, the proportions are all good. The simple between decks panelling is well done. Got the cover there over the driver's emergency door control. Indicator cast in there. The doors are nice. As I said, the design of the GM standard was quite clean and simple, and you might expect it to have 2 leaf doors, but it didn't. It had 4 leaf, and it looked quite heavy, and EFE have captured it really well. These capture the look of the real doors. The step is also nice. Again, a lot of die-casts have a step that's either too thin or too thick, or hasn't got enough relief on it. That is exactly right, and there's a little bit of relief on it, picked out in silver, as you can see. But yeah, it's all very good. The front wheel on this one has a wheel embellisher or nut ring, whatever you want to call it, on. Some of them were done with exposed wheel nuts, and they don't look quite as effective. The nuts are slightly overscale, and it just looks a bit too busy. But this one with the wheel embellisher on, it looks pretty good, as you can see. The back wheel is pretty good, but I'll come back to that in a little bit. There is a but with that. And I know what you're thinking, because you're probably looking at the engine bustle. I'm coming to that, don't worry. So we're coming around to the back, and I'm just going to show you why this is a Northern Counties and not a Park Royal. I'm just borrowing this Rapido Fleetline. Now this is actually a Metro Camel Wayman bus, but it's the back of it is pretty similar to the Park Royal version on the GM standards. So you can see the rear dome again is quite square, as are the corners, and the emergency exit window there is relatively large. If you look at this one, the Park Royals were like this, so they had a much more curved rear dome and corners, and a slightly smaller emergency exit window, with some beading above it, as you can just about see on there. So they were quite a bit different. So this is definitely Northern Counties, and it's correct for the Northern Counties bus. When you come down a bit further, the Park Royal ones like this MCW, the panel with the lower deck window on was vertical straight up, just a little chamfer at the bottom edge of it that you can just about see there, whereas the Northern Counties one was raked backwards like that. Just get my camera to focus there we go. So yeah, as I say, for the Northern Counties it is correct. The between decks panelling is nice. The little glass panel that had the registration plate behind it is printed on. The reason for that is so they can omit it if needs be. Originally in Manchester service they had a route number blind as well on the other side, but as you can see, Badgerline had panelled that over and put a fleet name there, so it just enables EFE to remove it if necessary. Some operators, when they bought these, panelled over the registration plate recess as well, and just put the plate directly on the outside in the middle. The Northern Counties ones, that was another variation. As you can see, it's over towards the edge, as was the route number blind. The Park Royal ones, they were slightly closer together, giving a bit of a cross-eyed kind of look to it. But the detailing is pretty decent. As I say, the window slopes backwards as it should do on the Northern Counties. You've got the emergency stop button cast in there. And then we get to the problem. The engine bustle is pretty good. The size and shape are about right. The panels are nicely modelled, nicely cast into it. It all looks pretty good. The grille is nice there. It's got a raised surround as part of the casting, as you can see. And the grille itself is printed on. It looks pretty effective. The problem is, it's a Leyland Atlantean engine bustle. And that's the thing, all of these GM standards that EFE released, whether they were supposed to be Leyland Atlanteans, Daimler Fleetlines or Leyland Fleetlines, they all had the Atlantean bustle. I'm not sure why they did that, because obviously they did the DMS Fleetline in the range as well, which had the proper Fleetline bustle. But for some reason they released all of these with the Atlantean version. I'll just borrow the Rapido Fleetline again so you can see what a Fleetline bustle should look like. As you see, it's got vents in the near side. There's the sort of mouldings around the base, and you've got sort of slightly different panels and things. So that's how a Fleetline bustle should look. And I said I'd come back to the rear wheel. See on the EFE one there, the wheel is nice, but it's an Atlantean wheel. The Fleetline wheel should look like that, with the much broader hub in the centre. Now, before you take out all your EFE GM Fleetlines and smash them to pieces with a sledgehammer, let's put it into perspective. Is it ideal? No. I mean, obviously it's quite a major difference between the two vehicles, as you can see. And if you're a purist, then it's definitely not ideal. You might want to avoid the Fleetline releases and just get the Atlantean ones, because of course the bustle is correct for the Atlantean. But does it have to be a deal breaker? Well, no. If it's in your display case, it's probably displayed like that. You can't really see the bustle apart from the shape of it at the back. Even if it's on a layout or diorama, is anybody going to look at it and go, oh, that's really weird, that was a Fleetline in real life, but it's got an Atlantean bustle? Well, possibly, because they might have watched this video, but generally speaking, no, people are not going to say that. So it doesn't have to be a deal breaker. Certainly for me it doesn't matter, because I bought this bus to repaint, so I'm going to repaint it, and when I repaint it, it'll be done as an Atlantean. So I'm quite glad it's got the Atlantean bustle. Indeed, that's one of the reasons that I bought it. So we'll go around to the offside. Again, general impression, pretty good. Cove panels, windows, between decks panels, etc. All good, same as the near side. Atlantean wheel there, Atlantean grille and bustle. Emergency exits, nicely modelled, the handle cast in there, and a little step to enable you to get up and down. The fuel filler modelled with a cover flap, as it should have, and the driver's cab side window looks good. The Manchester standard cab side window was really simple. 2 panes split down the middle, one slid open, one didn't. Done. We go to the roof. Let's start with the positives. The panel joins are nicely cast, and you've got the protective dish for the radio equipment there. Yeah, these panels here. Some of these buses in real life had translucent panels in the roof. Some didn't. EFE chose to model them on some of their releases, on some of them they didn't. And as you can see, they did it by printing on some silver rectangles, which, to be honest, look absolutely appalling. You're much better to pick one of the releases that didn't have them on, which a lot of them didn't. I'm not quite sure what's going on with this black dividing line in it as well, because as far as I remember, and my memory might be failing, some of them opened, some of them didn't. But the ones that did open, they just pushed upwards, like on coaches of the time. You could either open the front edge and have it sort of sticking up kind of at that angle, or you could open the back edge and have it sticking like that, or you could open both and it just pushed up, you know, the whole thing pushed upwards, but it didn't slide. They weren't sliding things, so I don't know why they've got that dividing bar there. But yeah, they don't look particularly effective. As I say, I'm going to repaint this bus, and when I do repaint it, they won't be reinstated. Have a look at the chassis, as you would expect from an EFE, fairly basic detail, but you've got the chassis members there, you've got the fuel tanks, you've got a little bit of the underside of the engine there. It's all finished in a nice subdued black colour, so if you can see the underside of the bus, you've got it stood on like a hill on your layout. You're not contending with like brightly coloured chassis shining out from underneath it. And we'll have a quick look at the interior. As always on EFEs, really, a nicely detailed interior, but it's modelled in one colour, so you can't really see the detail. They do benefit from taking the bus apart and painting the interior just to bring the detail out. You've got the seat back grab rails moulded in there to some extent, so I'll just try and get some light on it. Driver's cab looks pretty decent there. You've got the you know, steering wheel sticking up and things. It looks fairly good. As I say, it does benefit from just a coat of paint to bring the level of detailing out. So we come now to cost. How much will one of these set you back if you want one? Well, they're not the cheapest of die-casts, to be honest. They are quite sought after. This one cost me £12.60 plus £5 postage and packing, so £17.60 all in. And as I said earlier on, it was unboxed. I've had a quick look on eBay for the purposes of this video. I'm doing it in September 2024, towards the end of September, so the prices are current to then. The cheapest one I could find on eBay was £17.99, including postage and packing, so £18. The most expensive one I could find on Buy It Now was £204.49, including postage and packing. But there was one for £250, that was on bids, and it didn't have any bids on it, unsurprisingly. Both of those were GM buses versions. Although there were quite a lot of versions of this model done, EFE didn't do that many of the Manchester ones, Greater Manchester PTE or GM buses. And as a result, those operators, the PTE and GM buses itself, tend to be sought after. So both of those were the GM buses 1984 livery with a brown skirt, so orange and white with a brown skirt. As I say, £204.49. I admire anybody who pays that much for a model, but I personally wouldn't. It's basically a lump of metal with a few plastic fittings, but you know, each to their own. But as I say, if you want a cheaper one to you know, repaint or something, or just as a cheap model for your display case or your layout, they start at about £18, including postage and packing. I've had a look at a couple of the other dealers as well. Eliz Keith have got them for £20, £20 with postage and packing on top, and TTC Diecast have got a few for £19.95. Again with postage and packing on top. It depends which one you want as to how much you're going to have to pay. Some of them are more sought after than others. Are they any use for a model? Well, obviously in Manchester service, if you model in the Manchester area anywhere between the mid-70s and about the end of the 90s. In fact, I think First Manchester withdrew their last ones of these in about 2003. So if you model in Manchester anywhere in that period, you will need one of these. If you model in the city centre, you'll need more than one. I recall going there in 1992 and walking through a Piccadilly bus station, and it was like an infestation of these things. They were just like ants. They were everywhere. So in a multitude of different livery variations and things as well. It was really fascinating to look at. But as I said, they did end up going all over the place after deregulation, you know, all the way from Kent to Scotland, as I said. So basically, wherever you're modelling, you can probably fit one of these in. They lasted into the 2000s with other operators. As late as 2007, North Birmingham Busways, who ran between Birmingham and Sutton Coldfield, were still using them on frontline service. And you could find vehicles with various operators after that on school services and things like that. Less taxing duties. So basically, you know, if you're modelling in the UK, and buses ran there, you can probably get away with running one of these. They are a very useful addition to the collection. So as always, thank you for watching, take care, and I will see you soon. Bye for now.